Hello, thank you very much for tuning in. This is Authenticity and Teacher-Student Motivational Synergy with me, Richard Pinner. So, let's get started. Hello, I'm pre-recording this in case anything goes wrong, but I will be here at the end of the talk for a 10-minute Q&A. Here's my abstract, which obviously you can read in the program, so there's no need to go over that. However, I will just tell you the keywords from my talk. This is mainly focusing on teacher motivation and student motivation. It's research that I did for my PhD and have been continuing since completing it. I'm going to be framing this research from ecological perspectives. So that means that they are going to be focused very much on contextual understandings, approaching everything from a dynamic moving point of view. So this is very much a kind of case-dependent presentation of research. I'll be talking about core beliefs as well as a way that we construct our motivations for teaching and for learning. And linked to that, I'll be discussing the concept of authenticity, which it will be difficult for me to define quickly in this talk, but I will give it my best shot. I'll also be advocating the use of reflection and other metacognitive strategies to maintain not just our students' motivation, but also our own motivation as teachers as well. Just to quickly explain what it is that I did, this is a study about practitioner research. So what I've basically done is I've taught this class myself, and I've collected data on this class related to my motivation as a teacher and my students' motivation, and looking at the links and the synergistic connection between our motivation as much as possible. So this is practitioner research that I'll be discussing. So here's the outline for today's presentation. Definitions first. I'll try and be quick with those, but I need to explain what I'm talking about when I say motivation and authenticity. Then I'll go into the research methods in some detail, and then there'll be a very short section for data and analysis and conclusions. Each section will be quite short because I'm going to direct you to other places where you can read more about it. Okay, so let's start with the definitions. So, as I said, this research started with my doctoral research, and I was supervised by Dr. Emma Ushioda, and so it comes as no surprise that I utilized her person in context relational view of motivation in order to frame how I researched and analyzed the concept of motivation. So Ushioda talks about motivation in this way as being emergent from relations between real persons with particular social identities and the unfolding cultural context of activity. So this is where the ecological perspectives come into play, because everything we talk about in terms of motivation needs to be placed into context. We're not trying to measure motivation in the traditional sense. I don't think really it's possible to measure motivation in that way. So I'm approaching motivation as a construct with which fluctuates and moves up and down constantly. So all my research is framed with that understanding. I first got interested in this topic when I came across this rather old quote now from DC and Ryan and Kessler, where they said that the relationship between student and teacher motivation can either be positively or negatively synergistic. And this was just a small aside in their chapter, but it really got me thinking about all the times when I've been motivated by the fact that students are motivated. And when I've also felt my motivation take a hit when I felt that the students were not motivated by something I've done. So then I've noticed my motivation might fall away as well. And I thought that it was worth studying in more detail. So this became the primary focus of my doctoral studies. I also wanted to look at authenticity because I was very interested in the concept of authenticity as I was primarily initially interested in materials, although now my definition of authenticity does not particularly focus on materials, but it's a more wide-ranging definition to do with how we see ourselves in the classroom and how we view interactions. So not only materials, but also the way we are with our students and the way they approach learning. So for the definition of authenticity in this talk is a useful one from Vanini and Burgess, who describe it as the degree of congruence between one's action and one's core self-conceptions, consisting of fundamental values, beliefs, and identities. So this is a very important definition because here we get the link between authenticity and core beliefs, which obviously has a strong link with motivation as well. So essentially what I'm saying is that in terms of this study, authenticity was approached as a sense of congruence between action and belief with both social and individual levels. And this is particularly important because basically in order to be authentic, you need to be teaching in a way that matches your core beliefs about how teaching should best be done. In other words, teaching is authentic if it matches how you believe teaching should best be done. And that's the same for learners as well. Learners will find the content authentic if it matches their beliefs about the best way learning should be done, the congruence between action and belief. And this could be complicated somewhat, especially if we're talking about large classes or diverse classes where students might have different ideas about how learning should be done, and especially in cross-cultural classes or multicultural classes or classes where the teacher is from a different culture than the students, because each culture might have its own different educational approach, and underlying those educational approaches is a different core belief about the best way learning and teaching should be done. So if I go to, say, Japan, as I am currently working in Japan, and my ideas of education are obviously going to be quite influenced by Western ideas of education, whereas in Japan there's a different educational tradition. So we might see a kind of gap, which I call the authenticity gap, if we have a difference or a disparity between our core beliefs. And so one of the important things that I'll advocate when I'm talking about metacognition is explaining to students why we believe there's value in doing things the way we do them. So it's always important to communicate your intentions and your reasons for tasks and for activities in a classroom. So if everything goes well, you will receive a classroom situation which I labeled convergence, where the students and the teachers' core beliefs are aligned. We all believe that this is the best way we can be spending our time learning and teaching. And so this will generate positive motivational synergy between the students and the teachers. Conversely, if you have that authenticity gap, that disparity, then you're going to result in divergence within the class. And this is when you get the negative synergy between teacher and student motivation. And it's worth pointing out that not all the students will be all divergent, unless you're very unlucky. And also not all the students will be all convergent. So the most likely situation is that you'll have a mix of some divergence and some convergence when it comes to motivational synergy. And the best we can hope for is a larger ratio of convergence. And in order to achieve that, the best way is to communicate your intentions and explain your core beliefs to the students and try and get them on board with you. How this all connects with authenticity and motivation is that obviously talking about authenticity in terms of these core beliefs, there's going to be a strong link between motivation here. So authenticity is part of how I conceptualized motivation. And Weigart actually says that authenticity is a master motive for social interactions. And I think that this is quite true. We seek out authenticity in ordinary social interactions. Nobody wants to feel that they had a fake conversation, or that someone wasn't being true, or that there was some kind of inauthenticity between our interactions. And so this means that rather than trying to empirically measure and test authenticity, I'm simply presenting authenticity as an aspect of motivation. And that way we have this strong theoretical link. I think that there has been a lot of talk about authenticity and motivation being connected. And there even are a few studies trying to establish this link, but very few empirical studies. And in this study that I'm presenting, I rather than trying to prove this link, I'm simply theorizing that the two are linked. One of the things that I came to research was motivational synergy, this direct connection between the teacher and the student's motivation. How did I approach this? What was my framework for analyzing and empirically researching this synergy? So I developed a framework of indicators of synergy. And in my framework, there were 6 different indicators, although it's likely that there are more ways that you could visualize, you could empirically look at the synergistic links between authenticity and motivation, and teacher and student motivational synergy. But these were the 6 that I came up with in the study. The first one was on-task engagement. So this is quite simple. Every teacher will be able to tell you whether the students are looking at their phones, whether they're talking about the weekend, or whether they're actually engaged with the task. Of course, it's not always easy to know whether everyone is actually on task and engaged, but teachers develop quite a fairly good understanding over the course of their experience. We can quite often tell if students are engaged and doing the task that they're supposed to be doing. The second one was group dynamics. Obviously this plays an important role. Sometimes you go into a classroom and everyone is buzzing, talking to each other. They're kind of excited to be there. Other days you go in and maybe the weather is bad. Maybe the class is first thing in the morning. Maybe the students have all just had a big test the day before, and you go in and the dynamics are very different. And different classes have their own different dynamics. So that was an important indicator as well. Another way of understanding synergy was looking at empathy in the classroom. And this is to do with social and emotional intelligence. The next one was intuition. And by this, I don't mean the kind of vague sense of intuiting things, but rather more like practitioner intuition, which is well researched and something that doctors and general practitioners often rely on. And this intuition develops through experience as well. So it's not a vague notion of guessing, but rather intuition based on experience and knowledge of one's field. The next indicator was actual performance. And by this, I mean how well the students did in the assessments, how well they did on the tasks and the tests that were given as part of the course, because in my case, it was an institutional setting. And the sixth and the most important one perhaps was feedback. So this could range from anything from a simple smile in the classroom, or the sort of visual cues of feedback that pass between students and teachers. Obviously somewhat obscured now by the fact that most people are wearing masks. But also feedback from the students in terms of, for example, the end of semester questionnaire that they do as part of the evaluation of the class, or feedback in terms of reflective essays or comments or discussions in the corridor, or ad hoc interviews that you might have with the students during the class, things they might say. Perhaps they send you a letter at the end of the course saying thank you for your teaching. And also, obviously, this is very important for the students as well. So teachers, the more feedback we can give our students, the more likely we are to create this synergy, because it depends on a kind of dialogue between students and teachers. So there are all these things that can be used to empirically examine this synergy. And these were some of the things that I used and how I organize my data. Here are some additional references. Here are some additional references to things that I mentioned regarding the indicators of synergy. Okay, so on to the research methods now. So this is basically what I did. As I said, it was practitioner inquiry, classroom-based research. I was teaching at a Japanese university. We met twice a week for 1 academic year, making it the most amount of input that I've ever had with a class. 42 hours of instruction overall, with non-English majors at a Japanese university taking compulsory English classes. This research was primarily framed as exploratory practice with autoethnography. And so I collected lots of evidence-based reflection as well, recordings of all the classes and my teacher journal, students' pedagogical materials, PEPAs, as Judith Hanks calls them. And this is obviously a big part of exploratory practice. So everything the students did in class was considered part of my data set. I did reflections and observations, but so did the students. And then obviously I kept a teacher-researcher journal throughout the entire process. I wrote this up as my doctoral thesis and also turned it into a book which came out in 2019, which would have been brand new if IATEFL had been happening last year, which sadly it didn't. I'm afraid I haven't updated anything since, I haven't got a new book out since then. So it was introspective techniques all round, really. I tried to build metacognition into the coursework and assignments as a way to boost and maintain motivation. And this was, again, linked to Emma Ushioda's work on the small lens approach, where she advocates utilizing metacognition to help maintain motivation. So here are some examples of the data. I collected all kinds of multimodal data. I got students drawing pictures. I had audio recordings, videos. We did reflections and predictions, not just me, but also the students. We did a lot of self-assessments. This is especially for classroom participation. This was all done as a self-assessment. I actually designed the self-assessment questionnaire with the students by asking them what they thought made a good participator. Also, essays, reaction papers, and coursework, video projects, that kind of thing. These were all analyzed as part of the data set. And then, of course, audio data and transcripts for the classroom discourse. I didn't transcribe all 42 hours of instruction, but whenever I had an interesting ad hoc interview during the class with a student, I would make a note and then I would transcribe those interactions. So moving on to data and analysis. So on the first day of class, I asked the students to draw a picture of their relationship to English, and we call it the relationship to English diagram, or RED. And this was the very first thing we did in the class, and it was a nice activity to do, because once they've drawn the picture, then they have to turn to their partner and explain why they drew it like this. And the person who drew this picture, Mr. Auxiliary, as he's called in the study, he drew a frog being terrified by a hungry-looking snake that symbolizes English. And this was very interesting for me because Mr. Auxiliary was a very shy, reticent student who always sat at the back. By the end of the class, I did exactly the same activity with them after almost a year of instruction. And Mr. Auxiliary's red was pretty much the same, except In his new red, the frog looked a lot happier, and it had a fork, which I think meant it had some kind of weapon against the snake. So that was a very, very positive moment for me at the end of the class. As I said, we did lots of self-reports. So we did self-assessments as part of the course, and that was actually how they graded themselves for classroom participation. So 30% of the course grade that they received was awarded by themselves, and this has been shown to have a powerful enhancing effect on motivation in those large-scale meta-studies done by John Hattie, and again links with what Emma Ushioda advocates to do with metacognitive skill. I also created network sociograms, and these were very useful for me in terms of understanding the classroom dynamics and the relationships that students had with each other. What these basically showed was how students are connected with one another and how kind of part of the classroom they are. And I did this by simply plotting various simple relationships that were available to me. Here's a video of how I use the sociogram. So they're not very useful as a static image, but once you plot them into the software, that I used a software called NVivo, you can actually see how students are related, and you can also create a sociogram called an egocentric sociogram, which is revolving around just one student. So those are quite useful, and I did write a paper about that in my most recent edited volume that Richard Sampson and I have recently published. So please refer to that as well. When I was turning the PhD into a book, I wanted to expand it a little, so I collected data not just from myself, but also from fellow practitioners around the world using social networking sites. And so this was a comment I posted onto the IATEFL Research SIG's Facebook group, and Dima Youssef was very kind to reply amongst other people, and her vignette went into the book. And many teachers who I asked agreed that they felt a link, a synergistic link in terms of their emotions, especially motivation, with their own students. So I think it's very important to bear in mind that we are often connected to our students, and how we perceive their enjoyment and their connection to what we're teaching is crucial for us as teachers to maintain our own motivation. And of course, in order to teach well, we need to be motivated. And one of the reasons that we do teach is hopefully that we can be a source of inspiration to those people that we're teaching. So I think that it's pretty common sense in some ways that there's a link here. But what I really tried to do was try to empirically research this synergistic link between teacher and student motivation. So the conclusions now. So as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, authenticity can potentially be a gap if our core beliefs do not align with what the students believe is the best way to be learning. Then we can get an authenticity gap. We can get a lack of congruence between actions and belief, and this can be quite dangerous. So what I suggest is trying to view authenticity as a bridge. Try to communicate our intentions to the students and explain to them how we're doing things and why we're doing them in terms of our core beliefs about education. And that can create a bridge between our motivation and theirs, and create a synergistic link through the concept of authenticity. However, just be warned, not all bridges are as sturdy as they look, and there might be crocodiles lurking far below. As I said, this is now available as a book, so please look into it if you are interested, and I will now be very happy to take questions from you. Thank you all very much for tuning into my talk, and I hope I can see you in person soon at another IATEFL conference. Thank you very much.